New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
What if the person you think you are is just a fraction of who you truly are? What if years of conditioning and surviving in a challenging world have left you clinging to strategies and beliefs that mask your truest nature? I'm Catherine Duca, psychotherapist and self-esteem coach, and you're listening to Who Do You Think You Are? A show that looks beneath our psychological masks and uncovers our profoundly messy, beautiful, brilliant, tender-hearted essence. Join me as we go in search of the hidden power of our true selves. I'm so glad you're here.
Good evening. I am so glad you're here. I'm so glad we're together. If you tuned in last week and came back tonight, I'm so grateful. Welcome. So glad to be in your earbuds. If you're tuning in for the very first time tonight and don't know me, I'm Catherine Duca. I'm the host of this show, Who Do You Think You Are? I'm a psychotherapist and self-esteem coach, and I bid you a warm, warm welcome. On this show, Who Do You Think You Are? We go in search of our true selves, our unmasked selves, our undefended selves, the part of us that is raw and real and deserves to be acknowledged and recognized. You know, so many of us walk around, I think this is the world in which we live, we walk around and relate mask to mask. So on this show, we have an opportunity to hold hands together and get real. And so to that end, we're going to talk about truth tonight. We're going to talk about deep truths, difficult truths, painful truths. For many of you out there, this is a wonderful time. It's a time of elation, a time of celebration, a time of victory. And because we live in a democracy, that is indeed the way it goes, of the people, by the people, for the people. And on Tuesday night, the people have spoken. For others of us, dare I say the rest of us, it's a different story. Many people tonight are feeling bereft, sad, upset. As a matter of fact, I like to set an intention, and my intention for this show is I'm calling it Star-Spangled Upset. And my hope and intention is that by the end of our time tonight, we can perhaps move the needle slightly and begin to call it something else. Star-Spangled Empowerment, Star-Spangled Comfort, Star-Spangled Empowerment and Inner Strength. That's my hope. Let's see how we do together. I spoke to someone the other day, maybe yesterday or the day after, and she said, I feel worse today than I did Wednesday afternoon. And I feel worse than I did Thursday. And not the same as I did Friday. I feel worse, differently worse. And she was surprised by that because she thought with the passing of each day, she would feel a little better. My take on that, I'd love to know what you think. My take on that is, if you've ever lost anyone, and I'm sure many of you have, you attend the funeral or the Shiva, and there comes a point when the Shiva ends or the funeral is over and everyone goes home and all the activity dies down and you're left with yourself to begin to process the reality that the person you love and miss and counted on is not coming through the door. So I think this notion of I feel worse today than I did the other day really speaks to the grief that this situation has brought to the forefront for many of us. Grief. Anytime there's a loss, there's grief. And I say loss with an uppercase loss. I saw a meme the other day that said someone was trying to be very considerate, I think, and very sincere. And the person said, I know the Democrats are bummed out. I know you're bummed out. And I thought to myself, that doesn't really describe it, does it? Bummed out. To me, that sounded like saying the Titanic ran into a little problem. The Titanic had a little glitch. It had a hiccup. No, I think that people's profound hopes and optimism feels like they've become submerged, and spirits are underwater right now. So if you're experiencing any of this, I want to talk about grief. I want to talk about the stages of grief or aspects of grief, because I really think that's where many of us are caught. And I think it's going to feel like this for a while. I was just listening to the show that came on before me, Reverend Jim Webb's show, The Miracle of Prosperity. And he and his learned guest were talking about giving yourself the permission to feel what you feel. And I echo that. I think that's our starting point. We should allow ourselves to feel what we feel. Why? Because what is the alternative? What are we going to do? When we rail against the reality of something, we don't get very far. In fact, we get sort of glued to it. You know, there's a saying, many of you know it, what we resist persists. When you fight against something, you are locked into a tug of war with it. And so I hope tonight that by looking at our profound grief, and I invite you to enter your comments into the chat if you're comfortable and if you're comfortable sharing, looking at the stages of grief, I hope will provide some kind of framework with which to understand what many of us are dealing with, right? White light prayer. True that. Calgary, welcome from Calgary. Yeah. So if you're with me, grief, let's talk about grief. You may be familiar with a psychologist, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who is no longer with us, but she coined the 5 stages of grief because she worked a lot with terminally ill patients. And she identified that typically people confronting that situation actually go through what she thought were linear stages of grief. Now, since then, others have come around to say, and I do agree with this, I see this in my work all the time, the stages are not linear. Sometimes people skip around, sometimes they spiral through them and then go back to the very beginning. So it is not a linear thing, and then when you get to the last stage, you are done. So I want to emphasize that because so often we can feel as though we've come through a situation and then we find ourselves sliding back and we blame ourselves. What's wrong with me? I thought I had it. You know, I'm back at square one. No, try to understand that these aspects are dynamic and they are in flux. And so I think that, apropos, people go home from the funeral or the Shiva and you're by yourself. The reality that begins to sink in once the shock has worn off, because one of the earliest stages or aspects of grief is a form of, it used to be called denial, but I don't really care for that word. It's a type of shock. And perhaps many of you experienced that the other night. Utter shock, disbelief. How many of us said, it can't be. It just simply cannot be. Well, if you found yourself saying that, and if you still are saying that, that's okay. That's okay, because that's where you are. And the number one most important thing to remember here is that whatever you feel is worthwhile and legitimate and real. And so, sort of sidebar, rule number one, acknowledge whatever you feel. People make the mistake, I think, of trying to gloss over, and we do this with so many things, not just with the election, of course. We try to cheer ourselves up. No one likes to feel sad. No one likes to feel helpless or out of control or lost. And so we try to, cheer ourselves up and bring levity to the situation. And not that levity is bad, of course, but you really want to give what you feel the time and the room it deserves. So aspect number one is shock, confusion, disbelief, numbness. And I want to add to that, to those of us who expect or perceive the future to be a certain way, we may feel a particular threat. And we all know that when we experience a threat, what happens? How do we respond? Just automatically. We go into a fight or flight or freeze mode. And so perhaps that's where you've been living. Fight, flight, or freeze. Okay, legitimate. Be where you are. I think the next stage or aspect is anger. Anybody feel that? Anger, rage, blame, incredulity, I believe is the word. Hard to fathom, and anger about how could they do this? How could people do that? Right? So check yourself and see if you're there. By the way, can you be in two aspects at the same time? Maybe. But I think as we come out of shock and begin to thaw out, if you will, you begin to hit these layers of emotion. And anger is often the next rung. I'm angry. And then after anger, there could be bargaining. With in death and dying, if you've had a loved one or if you've perhaps received a diagnosis, you do some bargaining, right? Oh my gosh, maybe the slides are wrong. Maybe they got me mixed up with someone. Maybe the doctor made an error. Let's retest. We bargain. God, if those of us who were brought up in the kind of religion, for example, I was raised Catholic, nursery school through college. So again, I have a lot of Catholic going on. And bargaining with God is a very familiar stage to go through. God, if you remove this diagnosis from me, I promise I will. And I think with the election, there has to be a mistake. Maybe we need a recount. What can possibly happen to change this and turn this around? Bargaining. So we have shock, confusion, numbness, giving way to anger giving way to bargaining. And then what happens after that? Well, when you've tried your bargaining, or you've looked at the electoral map, or you've looked at the states, and you say, got to be some mistake. And you realize, no, there's nothing to be done about that. There's nothing to be done to change the outcome. Then what begins to set in? Well, it can be a combination of profound sadness and a feeling of being gutted. I've heard that word so many times this week. I feel absolutely gutted. So in a depression, now sadness and depression are not really the same thing, technically, clinically, but for our purposes tonight, I am going to combine them. So we'll just let it go at that for the moment. Along with that comes for many a certain powerlessness and a feeling of being lost. What can I count on? What can I count on? The grief that people feel and the loss isn't just the loss of, a candidate. For many people, it's the loss of principles that I held true, principles that I counted on, principles that I was sure my fellow Americans shared with me. So the grief isn't only about the tangible loss of the election. It's about, what can I count on? I wonder if anyone listening has experienced that. I will say that the day after the election, I happen not to be a water person, actually, but I really felt compelled to drive to the ocean the day after the election. Why? Because I was needing to be in the presence of something that I could count on. And I thought to myself, well, I could probably count on the ocean still being there, on the Atlantic. I think it's still there. And I needed to put my faith in something that was there yesterday and would be there for me tomorrow. So again, if any of you experience that, I think that's within the scope of emotions that we can call very understandable for something like this, for grief. So depression. Now, depression, who likes to feel depressed, right? It's a terrible feeling. It's a terrible feeling. It's a low feeling, a dark feeling. And you wonder, are you ever going to feel normal again? Well, I think we can say we're not going to feel normal again if the normalcy we're looking toward is in this external thing called the election. Now, without a doubt, things are going to happen, right? And we're not here to do any kind of autopsy, but I am here to lend my voice on when we put our faith in something outside of ourselves, all those eggs, they can drop. So we need to have a different kind of basket, if you will. And so when we come out of this depression, this darkness, this hopelessness, helplessness, powerlessness, victimization, in a certain sense, when we come out of that, we are closer to being in acceptance. Now, what do I mean by acceptance? I don't mean this outcome is okay. I don't mean that. But I mean, I accept the reality. I think we get into trouble with this and so many other things when we resist the reality of things. We waste time. We waste energy because the reality is what it is. I'm not saying we can't mobilize and change things for the future. Absolutely. And getting to acceptance is the beginning of emerging with a newfound strength. This is what I hope for myself and for everyone in the country who shares my feelings and these feelings tonight, that we can emerge with a sense of empowerment and look to the future. Because I really think the last aspect is the most promising, the most powerful, and that is meaning. Meaning. If we can find meaning for ourselves in this experience, we then have more of a shot at getting through intact, head and heart intact, and we can affect the outcome of the next election or the next hurdle. But if we're mired in non-acceptance of the reality, I think we lag behind. So, listeners, friends, we are in a collective state of grief. Those of us who were not happy with the outcome, a collective state of grief. So let me just glance at the. Also, there is a spectrum. Some of us feel this is bad. Others of us see it. Others of us see our new paradigm as dire. Well, thank you. Yes, there is a spectrum. Some of us feel this is bad. Others of us see our new paradigm as dire. Yeah. Yeah. If you've lost someone whom you really love, do you ever think you're going to feel this way again? Feel the way you did before? Are you ever going to smile again? Are you ever going to love again? Are you ever going to greet the day with optimism again? This is deep. This is really, really deep. Okay. So my wish, frankly, for myself, and if this resonates with you, I invite you to take it. We can perhaps straddle. We can straddle one aspect as we move into another aspect. We can feel this is going to be really bad. Boy, we heard some things, and if they come true, this could really be so painful, so demoralizing, so upside down from everything we know. I understand that. I share that. But we don't know. We don't really know. The probability is there, sure, but we don't really know. So if we can hold out the possibility that what has the appearance of dire straits, full-blown negativity, full-blown absence of what we held dear and fundamental to who we are, if we can hold out the possibility that something else might emerge. Because if we don't, and here's the question I ask myself, if we don't, what else are we to do? What else are we to do? Let's see. What other people? Rachel Maddow said, if we lost Tuesday, we now have a really big to-do list, more than we ever did. Yes, this is what I mean about finding meaning. I don't mean find meaning in necessarily why the election went the way it did. Many people are asking questions. How could this group vote that way? How could that group vote that way? How is it possible? You know, I'm not talking about that kind of meaning. I'm talking about the meaning. I'll use the Sandy Hook shooting as an example. We remember when that happened. We remember the darkness. But let's also turn our attention to what the parents have done, to the causes they belong to the foundations they've created, to the meaning they have found in their child's murder. I don't know that it gets much more raw than that. So, meaning, I think about Viktor Frankl. If you've read his book, Man's Search for Meaning, it's a profound book. Viktor Frankl was in the concentration camps. He was a psychiatrist, and he narrowly escaped with his life. He did, finally, and he wrote this book, Man's Search for Meaning, the premise of which, as I understand it, is they could do whatever they can to me. They can't take my spirit. They can't take my spirit because I won't allow them to take my spirit. And I know many of our spirits are very low, very dim right now. Okay. Dim is dim. Dim is not out. Dim is not lights out, over and out. So the way that dimmer switch goes one way with intention and commitment and willingness, I believe it can begin to go in the other direction. So I propose and encourage myself and those of you for whom this resonates to look for the meaning in this long term. Okay, let's see. There's some reason we're here during this time in history. Yeah, Dawn says there's some reason we're here during this time in history. Yeah, indeed. Civil rights, slavery, other wars, famine, all kinds of threats. We were born now. And so what do we do with our one good life on this plane anyway, as we are today? What do we do with this life? I, for one, apropos of Viktor Frankl, I do not want to give up my spirit. And my spirit has been very low. I want to share something, a bit of a story that helped me. And I don't know what, many of you are going to think about this, but the day after the election, I was just coming out of my numbness. And which I have to say was interesting, because in my numbness, I couldn't tell if I felt a certain peacefulness. And what I mean by that is the tension and listening to the news and the polls, which I don't think I will ever do again. And by the way, I'm very proud of myself as a news junkie. I am 2 weeks sober. I am off all news for 2 weeks, with the exception of election night for a few hours. I've been off all television and streaming media. And I'm going to tell you something. I feel better. I get to listen to myself. And one of the things I heard myself say as I was coming out of my anesthesia, I was afraid to look at my social media accounts. I was afraid because I felt so vulnerable. And as I was scrolling, I thought, if I see a meme that's gloating, I'll feel even worse. So I very tentatively scrolled, and actually I didn't see any memes that disturbed me. But I have to say, there was one person who occasionally appears on my thing, on my social media feed, and she is a conservative, and she would from time to time post things in favor of her candidate. And I was afraid to see her post. And so what I thought I would do, I thought this was so smart of me, I thought I would unfriend her. Now, she has shown herself to be a very nice person, but I couldn't stand the way I felt, in anticipation of her post. So I was going to unfriend her. And I got a little confused on how to do that. So I said, I'll do it tomorrow morning. And then it occurred to me that I'm unfriending someone whom I'm just sort of lumping into this hazy, broad group of people I am having a very hard time with. And she no longer was a person to me. She was one of those. And I tell you the truth, I was so upset with that experience that I was giving myself. I really was. I felt it in my body. So I did something that actually is uncharacteristic of me, but I reached out to her. This is a person, I should say, I went to high school with, but I have not seen or talked to her in, dare I say, half a century. Okay. I saw her at our 50th high school reunion a couple of years ago. Other than that one time, I haven't seen her in all these years. Anyway, I messaged her and I said, would you meet me for coffee? Would you be willing to have a conversation with me? I'm coming out of my skin and I need to talk to somebody who looks at this thing in a whole other way. Would you meet with me? I wasn't sure I expected her to say yes, but she did, a very gracious yes. And we met the next day. We spent a couple of hours together and I'll tell you the end first. I walked away feeling like one of my layers was kind of sloughed off. I felt better. The layer of being angry with this general group and anyone in it, not proud of that. I am so not proud of that, but that's my truth. I came away from the table with that layer significantly lessened. I'll tell you, we went at it. We had a very spirited, very frank conversation. I told her what I didn't like. She told me what she didn't like. I told her what made me nauseous. She did the same. But there was something about our willingness to engage in that conversation, knowing there was a bigger truth. And I didn't know this going in, but I think we each were counting on the bigger truth, which is we're going to be respectful. And we were curious, genuinely curious into how we each looked at this whole thing and what we were thinking and what we wanted for ourselves and for our families and for our country. And we Googled things together and we laughed and we high-fived and we said, I don't think that's quite accurate. Let's Google that. She did that with something I said. I did that with something she said. And there are a couple of things we said we're going to take back and delve into a little more deeply. Anyway, the long and short of it was a testament, I think, to both of the better nature in each of us. And she helped me a lot. And if she's listening, I say thank you very much for that gift. Now, you might be wondering, did we change each other's minds? I don't think one bit. I don't think one bit. And I still have questions. But the layer that was so deeply upsetting to me was how I was looking at my brothers and sisters. And I'm not saying that's gone, but this conversation helped me. And then after that, I left that and I went to dinner with some friends who share my views. And I'm going to tell you something. It was a little funereal. It was a little bit like a wake. We were emotional. We were upset. But we talked about it. It was a safe space. We cried and we eventually laughed. We laughed together. And I think for myself, it gave us a little bit more room. It let some air out of the bag. It just made something on the edges a little tiny bit better. And I'm grateful for every percentage of better I can get. So with that, what I'd like to do is take a little break, go through some of your comments here. And then, we have a segment on the show called Ask Catherine. And I send a newsletter out and I invite people on the newsletter. By the way, if you want to get on the newsletter list, just email me at Catherine@catherineduca.com and just say newsletter, and you'll be on the newsletter list immediately. It comes out every Sunday. It's called the Sunday Sauce, kind of an homage to my Italian-American heritage. But I put in my reflections on things and my thoughts on things and recommendations of things I like and trust and believe in. There's an Ask Catherine segment. You could ask me a question about almost anything. And I have a question or two that came in about this election, and I'll answer that question after the break. So let's take a breather. You are listening to Who Do You Think You Are on this terrific station, New Thought Media Network.
Please help us say thank you to our organizational sponsors, including the Hefferland Foundation, Affiliated New Thought Network, International New Thought Alliance, Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, Center for Spiritual Living Midtown, New Thought Philadelphia, Planned Happiness Institute, Summit Center for Spiritual Living, One Heart Retreats, Center for Spiritual Living on the Lake, Unity Kitchener, Unity Spiritual Center Ottawa, Om Center for Spiritual Living, Satya Center, Begin Within Ministries, Center for Spiritual Living North Jersey, Unity of Savannah, and the Center for Spiritual Living Seattle, as well as all of our individual donors. Thank you for being part of the New Thought Media Network. Please like, share, and subscribe. New Thought Media Network, positively inspiring.
What if the person you think you are is just a fraction of who you truly are? What if years of conditioning and surviving in a challenging world have left you clinging to strategies and beliefs that mask your truest nature? I'm Catherine Duca, psychotherapist and self-esteem coach, and you're listening to Who Do You Think You Are? A show that looks beneath our psychological masks and uncovers our profoundly messy, beautiful, brilliant, tender-hearted essence. Join me as we go in search of the hidden power of our true selves. I'm so glad you're here.
And we're back together. I want to read a question from a listener, and I was really touched by this question. Lynn writes, I feel untethered. How do I anchor myself again so that I could move through this? I feel untethered. How do I anchor myself again so that I could move through this? Lynn, thank you for your question. First of all, you have to know that you're not alone. But let's talk about what it's like to feel untethered, what that experience is like. You know, so often I talk, many of us talk about feeling grounded. It's so important to go through life with a sense of being rooted in something. And what is it that we root ourselves in? We root ourselves in our belief in something larger than ourselves. We root ourselves in the belief that the essence of that something is within us. We root ourselves in what we hold dear in terms of our core values, things that we can really plant ourselves in. So that word carries so much energy and such a connotation: untethered, floating, adrift, directionless, not touching down. When will I land? Hard to go through life like that, isn't it? Well, Lynn, and anyone else who feels untethered tonight, the first thing I would say is thank you so much for knowing that that's what you feel. That's such an important step, to know, identify, and if you can, give words to what you feel, and then to be in your vulnerability and share that vulnerability with others. I know that you're helping so many listeners tonight just by using that word, untethered. So I want to say, having acknowledged that, good for you. You may stay in that space for a while. I mean, it might just continue. I think it's important, and I don't know that I would use that word for myself at the moment, but what my experience is, kind of I think I would say twilight zone. So I say this for me as well for you, Lynn. Let's just know that that's where we are. Let's let our emotional GPS system tell us, okay, those are our whereabouts, and it's okay. And so that may mean, for me, let's see how this is for you, Lynn. That may mean, I'm not right now, I'm not as on my game as I usually am. I'm not as in control of my surroundings, the logistics of my life. I'm not as snappy. I'm snapping, meaning, have it together. I'm off. I'm off, not unlike when someone we love dies and you're off. And where is home? Sometimes if we lose a parent, we can feel, where the heck is home? Home used to be wherever they are. I feel untethered. So along with that feeling, twilight zone, untethered, is a feeling of a certain degree of a loss of control, don't you think? So I think there are things we can do and need to do to regain a feeling of control in our immediate orbit. So what makes you feel like you are, controlling your things in your life? Because this is the time to double down. If you like to cook for friends, cook for friends. If you have a hobby, do the hobby. If you engage in some activity, do that. The question, or not the question, the point is, what can you begin to do even while feeling untethered? Can you touch down for a moment and engage in an activity that brings you some sense of stability? Because I think that's one of the things we need to do to kind of rehab ourselves down through the aspects to meaning. Concentrate on what you can control. Research, by the way, backs this up. I said last week, heaven and hell are states of consciousness. They're not places. If we suffer, or if we are in a state of light, enlightenment, heaven or hell, right here, right now. And we usually get to heaven, not usually, we get to heaven 2 by 2, the Course in Miracles tells us. We get to heaven when we engage with another human being. And so I offer, touch another person, engage with another person, volunteer toward a cause, help someone who feels the way you do, help someone who is as down and out or more than you about this or something else. Help uplift someone, get outside yourself. So it's so crucial because, again, stagnation here is the enemy of moving through. The other thing is, this is practical, and I said it before, I think a media detox is in order, um, that's not too big a stretch. We can be curious and we can feed our need to know, but we can curtail the intensity with which we listen to the media. Take care of your needs. Self-care, of course, it's becoming so cliche that I think the importance is watered down, but tending to your own mental, emotional self-care. Acknowledging your feelings is the obvious one. Put yourself to bed at a reasonable time if you can. Go out in nature. Count the leaves on the trees. Go to the ocean. Feel the breeze on your face. I think at a time like this, the magnificence that is all around us, that comes from someplace, is the antidote that we can all start with. I think nature is much more our friend than is Grey Goose. I say that only somewhat tongue in cheek. I've had a few conversations this week, and of course, people are resorting to what makes them feel better in the short run. But we all have to watch that. We don't need any addictions or dependencies, because then we'll have two problems, right? The outcome is still the outcome, and now we have an additional problem. Look for things you can do. Look for things you can get involved in. Look for peaceful marches, of course. I'm going to be talking about something in the coming weeks. Inauguration Day coincides with the day we commemorate Martin Luther King Day, which is a day of service and a day of hope and a day of optimism and a day of celebrating that long arc to justice. It's long, but it bends in that direction. And so I'm going to be talking about some of my thoughts and ideas on what we can do if Inauguration Day poses a problem for us. The things that we can do to uplift and inspire both ourselves and other people. So those things, and of course, practicing mindfulness. I heard it said today, I'll borrow this, we are not in our next, we are in our now. This moment is now. And guess what? It's all we have. So again, while we all have to plan for certain inevitabilities, of course we have to plan. But if we get too far ahead and too far into what ifs, there's no end to what if. Again, we have to monitor that. I'm not saying don't go there at all, because future plans and the unfoldment of future plans is something, that's of uppermost importance right now. But beware of the idle what ifs, because that can lead us down an alley that makes us feel worse, not better. So Lynn, and anyone else who feels like Lynn, control what you can control. Don't rush this. Don't try to cheer yourself up. At least that's my advice to myself. I once had a therapist who said to me when I was feeling really low, I had gotten to something in therapy, a realization. And he said, now, Kathy, as I was at the doorknob ready to leave, he said, now, Kathy, don't come up too quickly. I said, what do you mean? He said, don't try to get too cheerful too quickly, prematurely. Stay here. Stay here for as long as you need to stay here. Don't manufacture a certain happiness. If you stay where you are and follow your feelings with some of these things, with a willingness to see some glimmers, chances are much, much better that we will move ourselves along. So, Lynn, I hope that was helpful. Thank you. Thank you so much for your question. Let's see, anything else? We're so looking forward to moving forward, but our work is only just beginning. Yes. Yes, it is. I invite all of you to think about something that I've reflected very deeply on, and that is things in your life that have had the appearance of something really bad. And it was bad. It was bad, meaning it was painful. It was shocking. It was the last thing you wanted. Usually that has to do with a loss of a loved one. But ask yourself, was there anything that came from that didn't cancel out the bad feeling? I'm not saying that, but that opened up a doorway to something unexpected, some other truth that you may not have realized or availed yourself of if the bad thing didn't usher us there. So the last thing I want to say, no one dislikes platitudes more than I do. And platitudes at a time of loss really are more irritating than they are helpful. So I don't mean any of this in the way of platitudes, but of ways in which we can help ourselves and help one another to expand our consciousness and deal with this profound hurt and profound period of darkness and disappointment. Many of us had envisioned what we were expecting. You know, the celebration, the elation, the mind-blowing happiness. And that's not what we got. But I like to say, we're not done yet. We're not dead yet. There was someone, I had an aunt who in her 90s would say, I'm not dead yet. And bless her, I learned a lesson from that. So if you have breath, you can make a contribution, and we could make a contribution to one another. So friends, who do you think you are? Well, maybe up until now, all you thought you were was angry and unbelievably despondent. And maybe now you're 1 or 2% still angry, maybe still despondent, but maybe, just maybe, there's a glimmer of how we can work our way out of this together. We're not giving up. No one can take our spirit. We mustn't let anyone take our spirit. So, with that, thank you for letting me into your earbuds tonight. You honor me with your time and attention, and I will meet you back here next week. If you have a question you want to ask me about anything, Catherine@catherineduca.com. If you want to read more about the heart of my work, you can check out my book. You can get it wherever books are sold, but easily on Amazon. It's called Unmasked: Discover the Hidden Power of Your True Self. So I thank you for being here. Thank you for your vulnerability tonight and your kind attention. I wish you well. Take good care.